Hello, my loves, and welcome back to Strange Playgrounds for a little while. Oh my God, I've been escaping into fiction quite a lot lately, as I think a lot of people have. I say escaping, that's not really the right word. That's not really the right word. I use fiction as a way of processing. I use it as a way of confronting and dealing with things, of processing the world, especially when the world is overwhelming. I understand things through fiction. I think a lot of us do, actually. It's the way humanity works. We actually learn more and more fluidly and more sincerely when it comes at us in a analogous or metaphorical form, like an allegorical form, as opposed to being taught, as opposed to reading brute fact or documentary resources. I think it works much better for us, generally speaking. Not It's not true of everyone. Everyone learns differently, but I think it's generally true that we process information and we consider ideas more sincerely when they come at us in these virtual or fictional forms, in these abstract forms where they're indirect, interestingly. That seems to be how we learn in general. That seems to be how we process information. It's what fiction is for. I mean, dreams and nightmares are exactly this. They are exactly this. They are our brains, our minds processing things in a metaphorical state. That just seems to be how our minds work, and it's a very interesting acknowledgement because it does mean that our world is linked to our mythology and to our fiction and to our poetry and to our art in a very sincere and very real way. It also means that the way our sort of academic structures, the way we generally preconceive of what learning is, are generally totally wrong. They don't work. Not in the ways we hope that they would, or we ideally market them as. We don't do it correctly. We don't teach one another correctly. And we've known this for a long time. I mean, I'm currently studying psychology. I'm doing a psychology degree. It's also been well documented in sociological studies that we don't learn when we're in classrooms. By which I mean our brains don't fire when we are in those synthetic environments where we are essentially coerced into learning something and presented it in this very brute, direct form. This is the textbook, this is the information, this is what you need to learn. It doesn't work. It just does not work for the vast majority of us. We need to come at information and materials in a very personal, idiosyncratic, and often in a very oblique way. We have to sort of approach things on our own terms, and we need to find an opening into that subject that's very personal. But that's a little bit of a tangent, to be honest. I've been reading a hell of a lot. I've been returning to a lot of old favorites, but reading a lot of new stuff as well. I'm still working my way through the Tales of Earthsea because there are loads of them. Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea series of books. There are loads of them. They are some of the most beautiful fantasy books I've ever come across. Certainly of their era. She, in terms of her cleverness, in terms of the breadth and complexity of ideas that she discusses in her fantasy at the time of writing, it puts most other fantasists of the era, her male counterparts for them mostly, into the shade. It really does. She's so clever. And also, I mean, you know my biases on this point, but when you compare and contrast to something like Harry fucking Potter, which I've always loathed, I really hate Harry Potter. Um, and no, I mean, I am that. I'm not to be too hipsterish about it, but I am that person who hated it before it was popular to do so. I did when I first encountered Harry Potter. I was about 17, 18, and I was already well versed in fantasy. I'd been reading fantasy since I was like 3. I remember learning to read with books like the Chronicles of Narnia before I went to school, and like Ladybird books of mythology, Greek mythology, the stories of Perseus and Theseus, the Gorgons, the Minotaur, etc., etc. I was already very well versed. I'd read Alan Garner by that point. I'd read obviously Tolkien. I read C.S. Lewis. I'd read, unfortunately, I'd already started reading Gaiman. That makes me a little bit sick at the moment, I'll be honest. That's one of the things I've been processing, by the way. Um, I'd read Pratchett by that point. And so many others. I may have even, yeah, I definitely read Barker by that point because I encountered Barker for the first time when I was 11. I'd read Stephen King's fantasy as well, things like Eyes of the Dragon and Talisman, the Dark Tower books. You know, I was so well versed in fantasy and mythology. I'd read the Romantics, I'd read Blake, I'd read a lot, things like Elidor and the just loads and loads. I was so steeped in this stuff when I was young because it was my genre of choice for the longest time until I started to sort of gravitate more towards horror in my early like adolescence. Um, so when I encountered Harry Potter for the first time, there were people at school who were saying, "Oh, it's so good. Oh, you've got to read this." So, okay, I'll have a look. And I read the first book, and I was like, "Yeah, it's not remarkable." To me, it just wasn't remarkable at all. I'd seen it done. Those ideas I'd seen played with 1,000 times before. The Worst Witch, for one thing, in the 1980s, is pretty much the same idea. There is a school or a college of magic in Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea books, but it's just handled better. It's much more ethical and interesting and complex than it is in Harry Potter. I think what I really reacted against in Harry Potter at the beginning was I found it boring. I found it really dull. I don't think it did anything that spectacular with fantasy, with the ideas and the tropes and structures of fantasy. But more than anything, the thing I reacted against is what it does with magic. Now, to me, magic in fiction, it by its very nature, it's designed to be miraculous. It's designed to change the world. That's the whole point of it. Yeah? As a concept, what does magic do? It upsets reality. That's what it's for. Ursula K. Le Guin gets this. In her Earthsea books, the first protagonist, Sparrowhawk, he is the inversion of the Chosen One narrative that you find in books like Harry Potter. Sparrowhawk he becomes a student at this college of magic, but they teach their students restraint. They teach their students the profundity of magic because just even the least spell reorders the metaphysics of creation. It's all about in the Earthsea mythology. It's all about the true names of things. Ursula K. Le Guin understands the the uh, the linguistic nature of magic and the magical nature of linguistics, which is why magic generally tends to have an invocational element or a verbal element. You have to say magic words or whatever. In Earthsea, that's literally true. Magic is the true language of creation. You use the true names of things to alter their natures or to influence them. And Sparrowhawk, because he's a testosterone fueled ego maniac teenager, ends up saying a spell which ultimately damns him. It upsets the metaphysics of reality, it tears open creation, and as a result of it, not only does he almost die, but he is haunted by the shadow, the manifest spectre of his own death forevermore. He's followed across the world by it. He's not some chosen one. He doesn't like bring balance to the force or anything like that. He's actually the opposite, and it's beautifully done. It's absolutely beautifully done. And then in Harry Potter you get the exact opposite of that, where you've got like, in fact, Harry Potter, that's the other thing I really disliked about Harry Potter. That's its politics. I hated its politics. I hated the fact that magic became ultimately, it became the province of especially born children, so privileged children, and it was just like materialist playthings and convenience. There's nothing miraculous about the magic in Harry Potter. That's what I really hate about it. It doesn't do anything profound. All it's there for is to act as like the toys and the conveniences of an especially privileged class. I hated that. I absolutely hated that. I've always wanted to write the inversion of Harry Potter, where you get the people from the Muggle world, or the people who can't just naturally do magic. who find their own ways of doing their own kinds of magic, like ritual magic. And then the born to magic world, your Harry Potters and whatnot, come down on them and try to oppress it. That's the sort of Harry Potter inversion I've always wanted to write, because I think that's more interesting. That's more interesting and morally and ethically profound than anything you find in Harry Potter. I really just didn't like it. I really didn't like it. I found, and I just stopped reading it after a while because I was like, this is not good. This is not good. I remember having arguments about it with people in my classes at school, particular people who really, really loved Harry Potter. And I was like, it's not very well written. There are a million times better fantasies out there. And since then, of course, that has only deepened. First of all, the more J.K. Rowling has revealed about herself, but also the more uh, people have gone back and looked at the books with an objective eye. There's a lot of objectionable material in those books. It was Ursula K. Le Guin herself who said that they are ethically mean-spirited, and she's absolutely right. I mean, I'd have gone further than that. I'd say that they are, at points they're bordering on the fascist. There's the whole subplot about the house elves, which is, by the way, the creators of the films knew this. They saw this, and they clearly had a roundtable where they were like, "We can't put this in the films. We cannot put this in the films." In the books, that the house elves, Hermione tries to organize like a revolution for the house elves, but she's ridiculed for it. She's called stupid and naive, and she's told, the line that's used is that, oh, they like being slaves, and B, they'll die without the purpose that slavery provides them. And I'm like, if that alone doesn't tell you everything about J.K. Rowling, her politics, and her ideology, then I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to say to you. It's awful. It is the same language that was used by slave owners when slavery was coming under political question. Exactly the same language. And I'm like, wow. Wow. Scratch someone who markets themselves as a centrist or a liberal, and you'll find a fucking fascist. I'm telling you, they bleed in fascist. They really, really do. But yeah, I've been reading a heck of a lot. I've been reading through that. I finished Lolita by Nabokov, and that is a fantastic book, but it is disturbing. Again, as I said in my video about Lolita, approach that one with caution, because it's a tale of epic abuse told by the abuser, romanticized by the abuser. That's the whole point of the book, and it's brilliant. I mean, it is one of the most fabulous pieces of writing I've ever come across, if I'm perfectly honest. But, and this is a huge but, it is horrible. It's really upsetting. It's very disturbing, especially when you do what the book begs of you to do, which is read between the lines. The minute you start reading between the lines and you see what Humbert, the narrator, is inadvertently confessing to, what he implies, it becomes really unpleasant and really upsetting. It's a very nasty piece of work, but I mean, absolutely brilliant. And I'm glad it's out there, actually, because it probably gives one of the most accurate fictional representations of the psychology of an abuser I've ever seen. And by the by, I deal with matters of abuse in my day job. We have to study abuse, and I've worked with people who have been abused, and I have even worked with abusers in the past. And I know whereof I speak when it comes to abusers. And yeah, he nails it. I mean, like, right, I mean, he absolutely nails it. He understands the psychology of the abuser. He understands the way they romanticize the world. He understands the way they justify themselves, and the egomania, the narcissism, how everything exists to serve them. He gets it. He really understands. But one of the other bits and pieces I've returned to, actually, I've been going through Barker's work again. I mean, as I do pretty much every year, because it's not just the familiarity of it. I mean, Barker's work is very much a pinnacle for me. It's something to aim for. It gives you a benchmark because it's so good. It's just so good. And the one that really hit me this time was the Great and Secret Show. I love the Great and Secret Show. It is Barker's attempt, and very successful at that, to write a great American novel on his terms and in his milieu, with all the metaphysics, with all the, it's taking the two essential souls of America, which is the potential of it, the idea, the idealized notion of America, and contrasting it to the materialist reality provided by capitalism. That's what the book does, and it's absolutely stunning. It's absolutely stunning. It's very, in its own particular way, the commentary is not that hopeful in The Great and Secret Show. You have these two characters, the Jaff and Fletcher, who are initially human beings, but they find a way of elevating themselves through a collusion of occultism and alchemy and science. They end up creating this stuff called the Nuncio. And the Nuncio is it's a living fluid whose properties are to accelerate evolution, but they don't just do it physically. They don't just spur evolution of the cells, they spur evolution of the soul. So when human beings come into contact with it, they become abstract of themselves. They become essentially divinities. And those with the grandest ideas, those with the most profound internal lives, become the most powerful, the most resonant. And Fletcher and the Jaff. Fletcher is the scientist, he's the visionary, he's the alchemist, he's the one who does all the work effectively. Whereas the Jaff is the one who spurs it on. He's the one who wants it to happen because he has had a taste of the dream life. He was initially a normal man. In fact, one of the things I love about the Great and Secret Show, and I think it is, without, fear of dipping into hyperbole, I do think that the opening of the Great and Secret Show may be one of the best openings to any novel I've ever read. That conception of the dead letter office, which is it's a post office in the US, or a sorting office in the USA, where all of the letters that have been like fuddling around the system that have nowhere to go end up. And there's a guy who works there who is nobody, Randolph Jaff. He would have to aspire up to be nobody. He is the most, so he's normal. He is so normal. It's unbelievable. He is this disenfranchised, disappointed little man who has this really quite shitty job at the dead letters office, where he has to open them, see what's in them, see if they can be posted, if they can be disposed of, and that's what he does. But he finds, as he's doing it over a period of months, that there's this secret communication happening across the length and breadth of the USA. Again, this is feeding into very American mythology. It's the whole conspiracy theory thing, yeah? And there is a secret life of the USA and of the wider world. There are these little movements and cults and principles who talk of secret things, of another reality, of other realities of magic and mysticism and occultism. And he discovers that there are other realities and there are secrets of magic and principles of magic, and it basically changes his life. It changes the state of his mind. He ends up murdering his boss again. It's sort of like a very dark inversion. It's the true American dream, right? Murdering your boss, yeah, for the working man. He ends up doing that and then leaving his life behind and going on this strange cult crusade where he leaves everything prescribed in his existence behind. And he ends up eventually finding Fletcher, who's a disgraced scientist, an alchemist, and metaphysician, who's been basically drummed out of science because of his ideas and because of the fact that he's addicted to, is it mescaline that he's addicted to? It's something like that. And the two confabulate on this stuff. They eventually create it. And Fletcher ends up accidentally, actually. He doesn't intend to use it. In fact, he's trying to destroy it, but it ends up taking him because it wants him, and it elevates him. It turns him into this semi divinity, this demigod of dust and light and inspiration. Whereas the Randolph Jaff, does happen upon it before the whole lot goes up in flames, and it takes him as well, but it turns him into this dark thing of shadows and fears and despairs and sublimated dreads, and the two embark on this ideological battle for the souls of the USA, and it is brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant. What I really find most fascinating, though, I mean, I will say Randolph Jaff, not Fletcher, but Randolph Jaff is one of the characters in Barker I identify with the most. Because I understand. I understand what he wants. I understand the yearning. I think we all do. I think we all do. That desire for secrets and mysticism and for poetry and for something to come for us, not out of the light, but out of the dark, out of the darkness, and show us something else, some other reality, you know? That's what Randolph Jaff is, and that's what he finds ultimately. And what's so interesting is the book demonstrates that he is the stronger of the two. He's the more enduring because he is ostensibly the darker elements of humanity. He has this capacity to tease out the fears, the dreads, the sublimated paranoias and secret yearnings of humanity and to manifest them. He can turn them into monsters that become his army effectively. Fletcher does the same, but with hopes and fantasies and dreams and ideals. And as a result, because the dream life of America has been so, of the USA, has been so impoverished, Randolph Jaffe is the stronger, and his armies are the stronger. They last longer, they're more elaborate. What Fletcher ends up teasing out of the people he encounters are things like manifestations of soap stars and Hollywood stars and porn stars in one instance, whereas the Jaffe, when he draws things out of people, they become these elaborate, metamorphic, demonic, Lovecraftian entities that are much bigger and stronger and nastier and more enduring than anything Fletcher creates. It's a really despairing commentary upon the dream lives that capitalism has left us with, ultimately. This was in the mid 1990s, so a while back, my loves. It's worse now. It's way worse now. It's a commentary upon how our dream lives, our abstract lives are not fed by these systems ultimately. But the darker side is all of our dreads, all of our paranoias, all of our sublimated longings are fed by these systems, by these engines. And it's by that that essentially parasites like Randolph Jaff gets in, you know? But I love Jaff. I think Jaff is very identifiable for most people because he starts as nothing. He starts as just like the most nothing of nothing. He's got no grand ideas. He's got no metaphysical ideas whatsoever. He's just a working underclass guy. And it's only by accident that he gets exposed to all this stuff. But it unlocks something within him. It swells his contexts to the point whereby he actively becomes an abstract of himself, a demigod of terror and of dread and of nightmares. And it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. And what he wants ultimately, the Jaff, it's not just about power. That's what's so interesting about Jaff. He wants to see. He wants what's called the art. And the art in the book, it's sort of like a shorthand for the means of seeing, the means of peeling aside the veil of this reality and seeing into the ultimate state of humanity's dream life, the abstract condition. It's called quiddity, and it's a sea. It's a vast, infinite sea where all dreams, all nightmares, all potential exists. It's the dream of existence before existence was even a thing. All potential is there, including everything humanity has ever dreamed or fantasized about or dared to imagine or conceive of. And the Jaff wants to peel back reality and see into it. And I'm like, yeah, I'd be the same. I'll be honest, I'd be the same. I identify with that powerfully. If you read any of my fiction, you can see the influence this has had because my characters do that all the fucking time. In my short stories, my characters very often end up ripping through or peeling aside the veil of reality or sort of like twitching it aside and finding that there's something behind it, that there's something more fundamental, there's something more beautiful and kaleidoscopic and strange, other than the brute reality that we are forced to perceive, or that's impressed upon us. It's this notion that we've spoken about actually in Not the Same Log. Myself and my compatriots, Elliot Chapman and Jack Graham, we've spoken about this a lot, the fact that reality is ideological by its very nature. Our notions of reality are ideological. What we refer to when we use that term, refers to the very complex interplay of prescriptions and biases and assumptions that are very difficult to pin down and which are not common between people for the most part. And that is what Barker's really getting at here. It's a commentary upon the dream lives of humanity and how it's so essential to nurture it. Because if you don't, then you get pollution, then you get things like Randolph Jaffe, and also the darkness that is occurring across Quiddity. There is this like this pollution, this living pollution called the Iad Ouroboros, and it is sweeping across Quiddity, and it is like it's the end of everything. It's the death of dreams. It's the corruption of all things. It's all the darkness. It's all the sludge. It's all the filth in the minds of humanity coalesced together in this swirling, just miasma of horror. And that's kind of what the Jaff has opened up. It's really kind of sad in that regard because I don't think Jaff is the bad guy. And the book doesn't think Jaff is the bad guy either. It kind of markets him that way for a little while, but it kind of flips it on its head at one point where he's not the bad guy. He's not the arch villain or anything like that. Um, he is still just a guy in many respects, despite everything he's experienced, despite everything he's become. He's still kind of just that guy from the dead letters office. And I love that. I kind of love that because he doesn't have the vision that Fletcher has. Fletcher is so interesting because, yeah, he's the weaker, he's the more ephemeral, because he's the less connected to the world. Fletcher is that part of us that wants to transcend everything. He's that part of us that wants to escape the engine, not understand it, but to escape it, to ascend to to higher planes of being. And that's ultimately kind of what Fletcher does. That's kind of what Fletcher does. And it's very odd. It's very strangely mundane the way he does it as well. It's a very peculiar moment in the book. And Jaff ultimately ends up accepting that Fletcher was the wiser of the two of them. I mean, I love that. I love that so much. And it's something that, I mean, obviously, reconsideration, America, some insight for America, for the USA is absolutely essential at the moment. So, yeah, I would heavily advise going and reading that. And its sequel, actually, Everville. Everville is wonderful. Everville, I think I actually may prefer to The Great and Secret Show. It's the more complex book, that's for damn sure. It's much more florid and complex in its ideas. It kind of throws away the binary that's represented by Fletcher and the Jaff and goes for much more ambiguous waters. And I love it for that. It's harder to read as a result. It is a harder book to read, but I think it's more fulfilling ultimately. I think the ideas are bigger and better and more profound in Everville than they are in The Great and Secret Show. It's definitely the evolution of that series. Unfortunately, I doubt we'll ever see the end of those series. I mean, they're called collectively the books of the art, but I doubt we'll ever see the end. I mean, there's often rumblings about how Barker's writing the third book in the series. I have serious doubts at this point. I don't think we'll ever see the end of them, but it doesn't matter. The books that exist are actually so good and so complete that I would argue, they're worth reading anyway. They are such interesting pieces of work. And at this point, given shit that's happening at the moment, particularly within the USA right now. The kind of literature that forces an examination of America's ideas of itself, yeah, absolutely fucking essential, I would say. Absolutely fucking essential.